Good morning and happy Christmas Eve. Because today, tomorrow, and the next day are days when, rather than my normal schedule, we'll be doing all sorts of Christmas things, I've decided not to work ahead in my journal like I have on the other days, because I want to make sure that everything I include from our celebration of Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and Boxing Day is true to what we actually do, and I want to make all of those entries with real photos and memories of those days, of course. So for the next 3 or 4 videos, I'm going to be sharing with you some different techniques and different ideas for things that you can put in your book or I hope will be useful at some point in any sort of project. So today I'm going to show you some stamping with the Santa stamp and some watercolor paper and a watercolor brush. And I just want to show you 2 different ways that you can do the same idea, and the differences will come out very subtle, but the way the process feels when you do it is very different. So I like to show both examples so that you can then try it on just a bit of scrap that you may or may not end up using, and you can see which feels better to your hand as you work on it. So you'll need some colored ink or some watercolor, and you'll need your black stamping ink for the outline of the stamp. And I'm using watercolor paper for this. You can do it on normal plain cardstock, but the more water you put on plain cardstock, the more it will buckle as you're working on it. So it helps if you want to use plain cardstock or plain pattern paper or anything like that, that you tape it down to a board. Or if you're going to do a big piece of watercoloring, even with watercolor paper, then it helps to tape it down. But I've just cut these little cards to 3 by 4, and that will suffice. So what I want to do is color in his hat with red. But there are a couple different ways that you can do this, and it will be a slightly different a slightly different look, very, very slightly different look, and it will feel quite different as you do it. So the first option is to paint in his hat first with just plain water. Now, I haven't used the best black ink for this because I've packed away a lot of my supplies for Christmas, and I've just kept out a couple ink pads, and this one is not completely water fast. So I'm afraid this is a little bit do as I say and not as I do, but I'm making the best out of the Christmas packed away situation. It's real, you know. Okay, so the area that I want to color is now colored in with water. And then I take some ink, and you can do this with a normal set of watercolors, and they don't need to be fancy. They can be even just children's watercolors, work just fine. And you can use a normal paintbrush and just have a bowl of water. This is the kind of brush that has water in the handle. Either one works, there's no difference. But if you don't want to have a whole set of watercolors, you can use the ink pads you already have or mists that you already have, and you just need to put them on a surface where they're not going to adhere. So I use an acrylic block. You can also use a craft sheet, a piece of paper that's been laminated, all sorts of different things like that. A bit of, a plastic plate, anything like that. Okay, so I put the ink onto here, and then I mix in some water. And then I'm going to just take the color and drop it into the water that I've already put on here. And it's going to naturally just move around and fill in that space. Now, it's going to look different if I let it just air dry like this, which will take some time, or if I hit it with the heat gun, which is going to speed that up, or if I take a bit of paper towel and I blot off the extra. I'm going to go ahead and show you the second option while this dries, so that I have a little bit more time for it to just sit. Okay, so the second option, I'm still going to stamp in black first, and I'm still using the same black ink pad that I've kept out, which is not the perfect ink pad for this technique. You want one that's waterproof, but this will work for today. Okay. And instead of putting water on here first, I'm going to go straight in with the wet ink. Now, this means I have to be far, far more careful to follow those lines, because when I had the water on that bit of the paper, then the color was going to stay within the water. Here, it's going to go wherever the brush goes, so those lines are not not going to control it the same amount or at all. But I'm using the same ink, the same ink, same paint, whatever you want to call it. So there's not going to be a huge difference, but you can see that this is going to look more like it was painted, and this is going to look more like it was colored. Does that make sense? This is less precise. But this, to get it precise, means that you have to really pay attention to getting all those tiny little details. So it depends on how steady your hand is and what look you like and everything like that. Now what I like to do is to take the areas that would be shaded, so the creases in his hat here, and make that a little bit darker. So I'm just going to pick up more pigment and put it around here. Now, if you really want to get precise with your shading, you can use markers, which is it's far easier to control for shading because you don't have the water element. Or you can let it dry and then go back in and keep adding more layers on top of a dry layer each time to get more shading with ink or paint. Here they are almost dry, and I haven't hit them with a heat gun, and you can see the difference in the color as it dries. So this is the one that I painted straight onto here with no water already on the paper, and this one had the water. So you can see that this is much paler, but it is more fluid around the edges. This one is way, way more intense color, but very detailed around the edges. It's not particularly detail work, but you know what I mean, where it's going right to the edge. Right to the line everywhere. And I've just added right now a little bit of a really, really pale kind of apricot-y pink to his face. Now I would say that if you're going to do something like this where I'm painting right across a line, so where he's winking, it's not really a space that I can avoid coloring, that tiny, tiny little line. And because I'm using an ink that's not ideal, it's not waterproof, it has definitely smudged there. So, you know, learn from my mistake. Don't pack away the waterproof ink. Okay, so from here I'm just going to cut this out and put it onto a 3x4 card to show you how it's going to go into my album as a little accent. I think I have a plan to merge my original idea of how I was going to embellish this with some tiny little things that will cover up my mistakes. We'll see if it'll work. Okay, so I just cut a little scrap of vellum into a rectangle with these kind of retro curves here. Not that curves are retro, but that this shape, that curved rectangle, comes up in some 60s and 70s design, and that's what I mean. Okay, and then I've put Santa on some pop dots. He's going to go toward one corner here so that the edges are just overlapping there. And I have my ho 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 die cut here. I'm going to put that on some pop dots, and originally I was going to have it go lower than Santa, but in this case I'm going to have it overlap Santa so that I can cover up the giant smudge on his beard. I think I'll add some ink to this before I do that. Okay. I'm going to have a Merry Christmas phrase down here, and I'm going to use my little stars in a triangle around the card. And I'm going to add my Merry Christmas here. to use actually a Happy Christmas, which is what we say more. It's more heard in the UK than it is in the US. And then that gives me a good spot for my third little star. There we go. So I've covered up my big mistakes with cutting out my Santa, and I have my little layers, a bit of vellum, and then this is one that I can pop into a 3x4 pocket as an accent. Thanks so much for watching. I hope that gives you an idea of things you can try to give really simple watercoloring a try and see how it feels in your hand and which look you end up liking best. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful Christmas Eve, and I'll see you again soon.